Thank you very much for everybody who's joining us. This is our monthly Simple Email Service webinar series. And today we've got a really special and somewhat unusual webinar for you. Unusual in that we are going to show you a proof of concept and talk about some very interesting things Toby and Andy and their team have been doing by combining SES Mail Manager with Amazon Q for Business. But where I'm getting ahead of myself, why don't I go ahead and introduce my guests today? I've got Toby. Toby, tell us a little bit about your role and what you're doing and where you are.
Right. Thanks, Zip. So hello, everyone. I'm Toby Ware-Jones. I'm the principal product lead for SES Mail Manager. And prior to that, also worked on Workmail. Been at AWS for a little over 3.5 years and come from, I guess, over 20 years of B2B IT services, primarily in comms and information security.
Great. And you're in HQ2 area?
I am. Contrary to the blurred background, I am indeed based in Virginia out of HQ2 in Arlington.
Awesome, awesome. And hailing from my hometown, go Boston Celtics, is Andy. Andy?
Hi everyone, my name is Andy Wong. I'm a product manager on the Amazon email team supporting the Workmail product. I have been with AWS for about a year. Prior to that, I had 10 years of experience in fintech and SaaS applications. Yep, I'm currently in Boston, but I'm usually based in HQ2 Virginia too.
And let's go Celtics. We're going to do it again next year. Okay, so without further ado, here's our quick agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about email journaling. We're going to talk a little bit about how we do journaling with an end-to-end archiving demo using Mail Manager as the archiving source. We're going to use Workmail, which is one of Andy's products. We'll use Workmail, which is our business inboxing solution, as the creator of emails, if you will. And then we're going to talk about a proof of concept that Toby and his team are putting together, as I mentioned, using Mail Manager and the archiving feature, and also our Gen AI Amazon Q. Of course, we're going to answer all of your questions. I will point out that somewhere in the user interface, kind of changes all the time, is a place I hope for you to ask questions. And we'll try to get to all those questions. We did solicit questions earlier from the registrants, so we have some questions that we'll queue up at the end. And we're going to give you an email address at the end of this presentation in case you're interested in anything we talk about here today, but most especially the proof of concept that we're going to show you. So anyways, without further ado, let's talk a little bit about email journaling. And I'm going to turn to my friend Andy to talk to us a little bit about that. Andy?
Sure. As an introduction, so email journaling is the process of creating shadow copies of all message traffic by recording all communications as per your company's email retention policy. Journaling involves capturing a copy of all emails that flow into, out of, or optionally within a messaging environment and writing them to a separate journal store. The journaling process is hidden to your end users, and the journal store content cannot be accessed by them. As such, it provides a reliable record of email traffic that cannot be deleted or tampered by these end users. And email journaling is crucial for organizations operating in highly regulated industries such as finance, healthcare, or government. Compliance and legal are responsible for ensuring the organization meets the stringent requirements around retention and auditability of the electronic communications, so that email journaling provides an irrefutable record that can be crucial in the event of legal disputes, regulatory audits, or investigations. And if any of these regulations on the left resonates, then we hope this webinar is going to be useful for you or your end customers. And even if a regulation may not specifically require journaling, it can actually help your company achieve compliance and respond quickly and with confidence to e-discovery requests. So journaling is really a critical tool for risk management.
Yeah, thank you. And all those 3, 4, and 5 letter acronyms are going to resonate, I think, with our many of our customers. So yeah, it's all about risk management. And journaling is not easy to do, though, right? Traditionally, this has been a fairly complex set of requirements, set of capabilities, correct?
Yes, there's a long list of challenges, and I can go through a couple of them. So, for example, firstly, email communication generates vast amount of data, often growing exponentially over time, and keeping up with the constant influx of messages, attachments, and metadata can be overwhelming, especially for companies or organizations with large user bases. And also, companies often have a mix of email systems, and integrating and managing journaling across these diverse systems can be complex and intensive. And even worse, in the event of litigation or investigations, organizations must be able to quickly locate, retrieve, and produce relevant emails and attachments. So ensuring the integrity and chain of custody of this data can be a significant challenge. Also, storing and managing the ever-growing volume of email data requires significant storage capacity, which can be both costly and complex to scale as the organization grows. And furthermore, ensuring the security and privacy of sensitive email communications is important, especially in the light of data protection regulations like what you saw GDPR or HIPAA. So implementing robust access controls and data encryption can add complexity to email journaling. And last but not least, one of the biggest issues we heard from customers about email journaling was always the approach to data storage. Journaling stores both emails and their shadow copies on your email server, and the data copied in an email journaling solution will continue to accumulate until the journal inbox is full. And when this happens, most of the solutions are intended to save the data in PST files, which are accessible but unfortunately corruptible by outside sources. So eventually, this accumulation of content takes a huge toll on your email server. Pair this up with the need to store emails for at least 5 years or more, and your server will grind to a halt. So overall, I would say email journaling is challenging, but AWS solutions help you overcome these challenges. For example, Amazon Workmail is a fully managed mailbox and calendaring service for businesses, and email journaling is a one-click experience, very easy to turn on. And in particular, Workmail is easy to manage for businesses with task workers, freelancers, seasonal frontline workers, and even call centers. We've seen creative solutions from SES customers combine SES inbound, outbound mails with SES Mail Manager with Workmail mailboxes. And we hope this webinar and our blog series can help you discover these AWS services to solve your challenges.
Well, I'm probably not alone in having a corrupted PST file in my distant past. So this sounds great. And this actually really fits one of our real main mantras here at AWS, which is like to remove that undifferentiated heavy lifting from the customers, right? You mentioned storage. We all get a ton of email. Imagine adding that up for every employee in the organization. And then all the other emails that are associated with outbound and whatnot. And you've got a really great place for AWS to really take away all of that complexity, manage vast amounts of storage, and job one is always security. So that's exciting. Let's dive a little bit deeper into this. Um, I think we hit most of the major benefits of journaling, but I think the key, if you want to wrap it all, it's risk mitigation, right? So any of the stuff that's going on, you need the ability, the legal team needs the ability to open it up and look and see exactly what's happened so that they can know and potentially take corrective action. So these are some of the main benefits. I'm going to turn to Toby now to talk a little bit about Mail Manager. So a little bit of a switch. We've been talking about email journaling, which is the process of sending email and shadow copies. But let's talk about Mail Manager. Let's do a really quick overview, but then let's dive into how Mail Manager acts as the archive for journaling.
Sure, thanks, Zip. And Andy touched on really a lot of the important parts of this. Historically, folks that have a journaling need have been encouraged to use a third party. primarily because it reduces the risk of shared infrastructure failure. If you host your own mail on-prem and that same basic system is also providing your journaling function, then the entire system is vulnerable to the same failure modes. So Mail Manager is an independent sort of managed email infrastructure solution. It's available from SES. And the idea is that for any mail you want to send, any mail you want to receive, there are a standard set of controls that you need to apply to that mail, both to simplify the management burden and not need, dozens of different skills, but also to provide visibility and reliability on the performance of all of those controls. So today we're talking about journaling, and that's essentially a storage and archiving function. That is one of the key features that Mail Manager provides. And again, it can work for whatever mail you choose to run through it. It can be mail that originates, you send from your own organization to other internal recipients, to external recipients, or it can be mail that comes into your organization from people or from applications, services, whatever it might be. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, Mail Manager sits in the middle as a sort of, very resilient plumbing function for all the connections into and out of your different email endpoints. And we're going to spend a bit more time now and talk about how the archiving piece works in particular.
Great. Yeah, so this is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So quick overview.
Yeah, sure. So the archiving function in general is really positioned for the simplest possible use case is this notion of retention. As a standard practice, most organizations will keep copies of email, so that if there's ever any questions or any investigations from internal or external sources, you have one place to look. Originally, this tended to focus on inbox-oriented email, mail that was written by or received by people. But in fact, a large volume of most enterprise mail now is programmatic. It's generated by applications under automated conditions. And it provides a sort of audit trail of activity, states of change, warnings, error conditions, all sorts of stuff like that. And email works because it's supported by everything. Even the most simplistic device probably has a rudimentary email configuration and can send a message to some notification server where it's presumed that people with authority and access will pick it up and take action. So all of that activity is part of your organizational history, and it's worth retaining it. Storage now is inexpensive enough that the old argument from years and years ago was, oh gosh, we have to pick and choose because storage is really expensive. Nowadays, storage is a commoditized function. It's very inexpensive, and more importantly, you don't need to choose up front how much you need. Again, it used to be we had to think about how many, originally megabytes, then gigabytes and terabytes of storage we should budget for this function. Now, essentially, the available pool of storage can be unlimited, and all we pay for is the amount we actually use. So Mail Manager, as it receives mail from its configured what are called ingress endpoints, the mail is accepted into the system and it arrives at the rules engine. And the rules engine is really where the customer configures what to do with it. And there you can have lots of parallel functions. You can, deliver it to its recipients. You can change the recipients and send it somewhere else. You can write it to S3. So, very simple model. If you want to use S3 and perform your own actions on it in your own storage bucket on AWS, you can do that. You can make use of security tools that are made available in Mail Manager through what are called email add-ons. We don't want to be in the space of providing security inspection and content enforcement because there are lots of really high quality third-party tools. So instead, we make those very available. But the archiving piece is the one that, again, is our focus for today. And there's really three parts to it. The first is accepting the messages, and we do that and normalize all the different sources and bring them all into the rules engine via a single pathway. The second is choosing which of those to write to the archive. You might choose to write all of them, or you might choose to write only messages from Toby or only messages to Andy. And you can have multiple archives overlapping. They can have different retention periods and different insertion criteria. And then finally, once you've delivered messages into it, the third function is the indexing and the search so that you can actually find them again in the future. And that's really where investigations are either won or lost. If you're able to find mail and export it to a separate archive and present it in some useful way for whatever the investigation requires, then suddenly the archive has proved its worth. And so the easier that is, the faster it can be done. Ultimately, the less sort of burden there is on making use of this archive, and it can become part of regular routines. It's no longer limited to ultra specialized sort of, the scariest tier of questions. It can be used as a routine checkpoint for quality control. It can be part of your release engineering process. Did all the notifications about the build process go out correctly? And you can reconstruct that audit trail. So the Mail Manager archiving provides one location for all of that work to be done, and it doesn't care whether it's an inbox originated message from a person or an application generated message from a server somewhere in your infrastructure, or an IoT device that's sort of connected over some low bandwidth mobile data connection out in the field, and every now and then it provides a health report back to the home base. All of that becomes available and retrievable through the Mail Manager archiving function.
And it's not difficult to set up, right? I mean, I've set it up many, many times. So it's really just a 1, 2, 3 kind of a process, right? So
Yeah,
we,
that's right. Again, I said earlier, you no longer have to worry about, how much archive do I need up front? That decision just gets taken out of consideration altogether. You choose to use archiving. The Mail Manager interface will walk you through it in the console. You create an archive. It has a unique ID, like every other resource in AWS. And then your rules engine will make use of that archive as a named resource, and whichever messages meet your evaluation criteria are then written to it directly and indexed on the way in. So you can be up and running with an archive in just a few mouse clicks once you have your Mail Manager set up already up and running.
and it's really just as easy as creating a rule set, as you mentioned, giving the rule
Hmm.
set a name, and then setting up setting up actions. In this case, we've set up an archive action. We've created an archive with one click of a button,
Yep.
right? So we create the archive, give it a useful name. In this case, it's Journaling Archive Demo. And then we just set this up, right?
Yep.
And then we bind this to an ingress endpoint.
Hmm.
And as long as mail is pointing in that direction, sort of Bob is your uncle. And then in terms of pointing mail in that direction, let's go back over to your email server. We're
Right.
again using Amazon Workmail, but this would work with, your email server or service here, right?
Yeah,
Um,
that's right. So any mailbox provider is going to have a journaling configuration somewhere, and it should be simple like it is for Workmail. In the Workmail console, you can see here, there's a toggle to turn on journaling, and then you supply it in the form of an email address, which is your journaling destination. So you can see in the red box, we've created a domain called journaling.solutions. That domain's MX record is hosted by Mail Manager. So any mail sent to that will be routed to the Mail Manager ingress endpoint. And assuming it's accepted at that point, with the traffic policy and rules we configured previously, it'll flow into that same archive we've already set up. And that's it. There's no further setup or maintenance work required. And you have a searchable interface, which I think we're going to show you in a moment. But yeah, here it is. So once you've started writing messages into your archive, you can go to the Mail Manager archiving controls and perform a search. You choose the archive you wish to search. Again, you can have as many or as few as you want. And then there's a series of search criteria and filters you can configure and a time frame against which they're applied. You can run that search. We keep a record of the search if you need to rerun it again in the future. And you can also use the same search criteria if you don't want to browse it in the console, but you want to export it for offline work. We also let you export it to your own S3 instead of just displaying the results live on the console.
yeah, so really simple to set up, compatible basically with everything out there. And then incredibly useful literally from the minute you start sending email journaling into the archive. And you can go in and you can search for a particular message, or as you pointed out, export a bunch of messages. Maybe the compliance team is looking at something, or, like you mentioned, the dev team is, sort of looking at, messages from the build server or what have you. So really flexible. We can have multiple actions. So we can archive to a couple of different places if we need to for different use cases. We can archive and save to S3 at the same time. We can archive and continue to send the message along. So we can stack these rules and these actions up in as you mentioned, plumbing. My mom would be so happy to know that I'm a plumber now. I just have to become a doctor and then I will meet all of her wishes. All right, so this is great and this is very human-centric on the searching. So I'm,
Hmm.
somebody in HR and I'm going to look for an email or something like that, right? But Andy mentioned at the top of this the vast volume of email. And just look at what comes into your email box and multiply that by the number of people in your organization, the number of people in your organization you're communicating with, they're communicating with you. It becomes a huge number. And, we were kind of contemplating well, what kind of interesting things can we do? We've heard like large data, right? All
Hmm.
of a sudden we've got a ton of data now that all of a sudden we can do some interesting things with that. So, Toby, your team took on the challenge of starting to do some proof of concept demo work.
That's
What?
right. So
Yeah.
we up to what we've up to this point, everything we've talked about is for anyone who's done work with journaling solutions, probably fairly familiar. We like to think that ours is easy, and it's certainly very cost effective and a strong value proposition for the classic box you draw around journaling. But then we realized, you know what? One of the great things about using services inside AWS is that customers then have the option to leverage adjacent services elsewhere in AWS. And of course, one of the service categories that's generated a lot of discussion recently are AI-powered solutions. So we asked ourselves, okay, if we had this great organizational archive of email activity, person to person, application to person, application to application, there's going to be a tremendous amount of sort of low to medium fidelity signal in there, which could be useful for a lot of other things. And so what we were interested in was, could we create a parallel query mechanism where it wasn't literal search criteria in the classic model where you already have a pretty solid idea ahead of time of what you're looking for, but instead we go towards those LLMs, those large language models, and we say, okay, what if I had one of these different roles inside an organization? I'm a people manager, I'm a security person, maybe I'm HR. And I wanted to get a pulse on different types of potential activities that I'd want to deal with sooner if I knew about them. What could I do to enable that with Mail Manager? And so the demo we've captured here in the webinar for today is about using Amazon Q for Business, which is an implementation of Amazon Q, which is a chatbot technology which learns from content across all the Amazon web properties. But instead of training it with Amazon sourced content, we train it with email in your journaled archive. And it's specific to yours. So there's no cross pollination. We're not learning about organizational behaviors by industry or by geography or any of that. It's just your own customer content. And we feed that into Q for Business, and then we can ask it some simple questions, or eventually some much more complex questions. But we thought we'd show you a few examples of this as a way to leverage this archive and get more value from it on an ongoing basis, and not just when the proverbial house is on fire. Imagine that you could learn ahead of time that you should take some preemptive measures, which will reduce your risk significantly and your recovery cost compared to after the genie's out of the bottle. And so that's really what we've done. We've got a few examples we'll show you, but I'll just walk you through how it's set up first. So again, in the Mail Manager rules engine, the rules are defined by conditions and criteria. And what we've done is we've created a deliver to queue for business rule condition. So, when we release this, and to be clear, this is not yet in the production product. We'd love to get feedback from customers at this point because we're still sort of working through exactly what the final design priorities are going to look like. But we have this working internally. You deliver to queue for business. It shows you now the little inset diagram shows that now we're going to connect to the connector for queue for business. And then on the next slide, you'll see just like when you're specifying other AWS resources, you will have created a queue for business resource ID. You drop that in here, and the index ID that goes with it, and then you provide a role which has permissions. That can be a role within your own AWS organization. And again, this is all about sort of ensuring the sanctity of secure access across different resource types. So this is a standard way to do this in AWS if you haven't set something up like this before. But once you've done that, thereafter, in parallel to your journaling rule, now we're delivering and training your Queue for Business implementation. And that's all you need to do. After that, you can go to your Queue for Business console, and you can submit prompts and ask questions. So this is the first one we thought about. And again, we had to generate and synthesize our sample email. So, forgive us if it's fairly obvious. But the point is the LLM can parse any content you choose to send to it. And over time, as it gets a richer database, the insights that are available increase in their sophistication. So here's our first question. Are employees concerned with work-life balance? And the prompt we gave it was, you're an AI assistant looking for indications of employees concerned about work-life balance, highlight any findings and provide a short summary. So this is very different from your classic sort of, keywords and wildcards type rigid search criteria. This is an open-ended language query. And what our QPOC has come back with is it sees indications of concerns about work-life balance, and it'll give you a written summary of the findings it found in the archive. It provides links to the specific files that it consulted. So for example, we might then take that back to our archive search and allow you to retrieve the actual individual messages that are relevant for these findings, because they're all correlated by a common message ID. But again, you don't need to be an IT administrator to see how to use this. You have a plain English or plain language, I should say, prompt console. You can ask it questions, and for the permissions you have and the access you've been given, you're going to get visibility on these types of results. So this is the first one, the work-life balance question. And we have another one, which is to do with perhaps the next level up, and now we've got perhaps a manager who's concerned about team dynamics and how a project's going to go and whether there are any risks. So in jurisdictions where this is an approved level of access to employee email, you can say, look, are any employees talking about leaving and planning to leave the company? And now what we get is a much more specific indication where an employee is clearly unhappy. They've apparently already accepted a job offer. Why they're talking about that in their existing employer email remains to be seen, but it happens.
People do.
And the manager here, this isn't about sort of punishment. This is about, again, risk management, the whole theme here. If we need to make staffing changes on a project or have another look at timelines and deliverable dates, now we get to do so with the benefit of prior knowledge rather than only being on the back foot and having to react to an unexpected change when the announcement comes. The final example is more about the attempted exploits. There are lots of tools that are very good at identifying successful exploits, whether they're conveyed through email or websites or whatever it might be. But what we also have is this lower level of risk to do with prospecting. It's reconnaissance activity. Are people looking for vulnerable targets before they choose to pursue them more aggressively? So are there recent phishing attempts? And phishing attempts are, in fact, only one very small step away from compromise, because usually the call to action in the phishing emails is a single click, and that either downloads malware or takes you to a false site where you're going to provide you might provide sensitive information that you shouldn't. Lots of different ways for the phishing attacks to go, but again, what we're interested in are the patterns over time changing? Are they tending to focus on people who identify as associated with one particular service unit, and maybe there's public data because they all identify that service on their LinkedIn profiles or whatever it might be? The attackers can be quite sophisticated, and having this kind of low level of intelligence is important. And again, you sort of get it for free because we're already archiving all of this incoming and outgoing mail activity to all of these destination mailboxes. So we see this as a really nice way to leverage these archives and give customers more ownership and control over, insights that are available, which again, individually may not rise to the level of requiring immediate action in all cases, but they're the type of thing which in hindsight, you wish you would have known sooner. And so now what we're doing is we're giving you that crystal ball. We're letting you peer into the sort of murky depths of different language styles and communications patterns, and gaining some of that insight using Q for Business.
Yeah, those are really interesting examples. And, I go back to my days as a startup founder a million years ago. And, just what's going on in the temperature of the business, right? Growing fast, people are moving around really quickly. Are people burning out or whatever? And a lot of that, sort of chit chat takes place on email, if you will. Or, that second example, employees thinking of leaving, right? You can think of the professional firm that's worried that several key employees might be leaving and taking clients with them, right?
Mhm.
Something you'd want to try to get yourself ahead of, certainly. Um, but also, even if you're just looking at it at a high level perspective from a talent retention and recruiting perspective, right? So talent retention wants to make sure that the organization is a place that people want to work and people are rewarded and they feel well sort of compensated and happy and are growing, right? And a lot of that is sort of like feels, right? Like what is it? What's the temperature? What's the feels? But then if you can get some indication that maybe some developers are going to leave, maybe they're going off to a startup, you combine those two kind of searches and you realize, well, we're going to have to go find some new employees, right? We have some at risk and we want to start proactively trying to line up the right talent so we're not left with a talent deficit, right? So I can see how these different capabilities could be used quite interestingly, and then of course as an email admin, being able to look into phishing attempts and other malware attempts and just
Mhm.
other stuff that should not be going on in the email system. And, maybe, sniff it a little bit. You think there might be a little bit of a problem, but being able to sort of dive into the archive in this fashion, I think is really quite interesting. And I think we're only scratching the very, very surface. And kind of to that point, Toby, you had asked me to make sure that our audience knows you and your team and Andy, you are very, very interested in what our customers and potential customers' thoughts are around these ideas, and you'd like them to share feedback with you directly through that mail manager interest at Amazon.com email address, correct?
That's right. Yeah, we would love to get, and it can be as sort of bold and ambitious an idea as possible, or you might have some very tactical feedback on your experiences with the product to date. But we invite folks to talk to us about where you think the most important gaps are that you currently struggle with, either because the technology is not ready for you, or it's too expensive, or too hard to set up, or whatever it might be. We'd love to hear your ideas. Again, we're not trying to, replace the need for a lot of these high-end specialized tools, but we recognize that for a lot of organizations, embarking into those investments might be more of a crawl, walk, run kind of progression. And if you can try things out and you can get a sense for where you're going to get the most value, and Mail Manager can help you do that with these sorts of tools and integrations, we'd love to hear about that. We'd love to hear about how you want to manage permissions, how you want to manage audit of these sorts of activities. We want to know how they're going to work alongside other tools you may already have, or maybe something you tried and you didn't get the experience out of it that you wanted. That discussion is great. The thing with Mail Manager, which is a little different, is that we're focused only on the infrastructure. A lot of email products generally try to be sort of an all-in-one solution. And traditionally, the sort of mail, again, that plumbing that we've talked about was sort of table stakes. It was a necessary part of it, but it wasn't really where the focus was. We're turning that into the focus because handling very large volumes of mail around the world is really hard. And doing so while guaranteeing deliverability and guaranteeing regional availability and performance and response under impairment conditions, all of that kind of stuff requires a lot more than throwing out a postfix server and hoping that it'll be okay. So we'd love to connect with customers who are looking at Mail Manager, who are interested in these sorts of opportunities. You've used journaling products, you've used maybe some AI products. We want to make this as easy as possible to arrive at a benefit on the output side that is important to your business. And if we're successful at that, the plumbing part, it goes away. It just works. And you don't need to think about it because you've upgraded that part of your infrastructure, and now you can focus on your business objectives. So you can set up this Queue for Business demo now. If you're a Mail Manager user or you want to go and set up your own deployment, you can use the Write to S3 action that's available in Mail Manager today. And there is a queue connector for Queue for Business that'll pull from your own S3 bucket. So it's not quite as slick as what we've built in the POC, but you'll end up with the same effective result, which is you're delivering messages to a queue for business archive, you're indexing it, and then you can go to your prompt application and ask it questions and see what it can do. So for customers that want to experiment with that, we'd love to hear from you as well. We can, give you a few pointers on getting it set up. It's not very hard. Once you learn a few of the AWS basics, you should be up and running, in under an hour, I think is a pretty realistic estimate. And again, we want to see where you go with it. These are tools and capabilities that are not limited by anything other than ultimately, the customer's own needs and imagination. And so we look forward to seeing what you're up to and hearing your feedback and supporting you as you come to us with requirements and needs to expand.
Yeah, and I'll point out that's great. In terms of being a builder, many of our customers are builders, and we have a lot of software companies that build solutions, obviously, right on top of the AWS services. That write to S3 bucket action and then using S3 triggers. Oh my gosh, you can do all sorts of really great things. So, of course, we've been talking about using Q for business.
Mhm.
But I know we did a proof of concept a couple of weeks ago where we used S3 Lambda and Bedrock, and we used the Claude Haiku model. And
Mhm.
we were sending emails in, and we were doing interesting things. Tell us about the emails, and then taking actions based on what the emails are about and their level of urgency. We tied them into Amazon Connect to look for contact information, so we could make a phone call if something was urgent, etc. So there's a wide range of inventive type solutions that I think we're going to see from these kinds of actions. But certainly you don't have to limit yourself to Q or even Bedrock or what have you.
Right.
Going to S3 bucket and then going off and doing your thing. So that's great. If you have interest again or questions, please not like product support questions like that can go through your account team or through the technical support channels that you already know and love. But if you are interested in how Mail Manager can be used in your organization or how you might enhance your own products and services through Mail Manager, please don't hesitate to use that email alias and the team will get back to you in ready time. So I know we're close to my vacation. I mean, close to the end of our webinar. Andy, too. I know that we've got some questions. Why don't we go ahead and seed it with a couple questions that came before the webinar started, and then we can also address questions that came during the webinar. Jesse, are you there?
Hey, Zip, Jesse had to drop.
Hi, Preeti.
Hey, I'm here.
Excellent. Okay. So, do we have questions? Because I've got some real specialists here that have answers.
Uh, yeah, I think there were a few questions. Some of them I think we addressed during the webinar, one of which was
Mhm.
about understanding how to implement email journaling, which we covered, talking about the integration between Q and SES Mail Manager, which we spoke about as well. There's one question around pricing for journaling.
Mhm.
Want to quickly touch on that?
Yeah, sure. So the way Mail Manager is priced in general, and this is true for the archiving function and everything else, it's all consumption based. So you're not having to buy a chunk of capacity up front. You pay on a per message basis or per volume of data basis, depending on exactly what you're doing. So for Mail Manager archiving, what you pay for is for every 1,000 messages that you flow into Mail Manager, you pay a messaging fee of 15 cents per 1,000 messages. And then if you choose to write them to an archive for storage, you pay a one-time indexing and storage cost, which is assessed again as the number of gigabytes that go through. And then on a monthly recurring basis, you pay a separate fee for the total volume of data that's retained. So between the ingestion cost, you pay the public price, which is $2 per gigabyte to ingest and index the data, and then you pay 19 cents per gigabyte on a monthly basis for the retained storage in the archive. So for most mid-sized organizations, in practical terms, you're going to be paying on the order of a few dozen dollars a month to probably a few $100s a month, depending on the scale of your email. So, let's just say in round numbers, $200 a month, so $2,400 a year for this function. And I think, because we're not limiting it or indexing it against the number of recipients, the number of mailboxes for any of that cost, When you divide it out by the number of mailboxes that amount supports, it ends up being fairly inexpensive for an organization with even, only a few dozen employees. But once you get into a few hundred employees, it becomes very inexpensive on a monthly basis per mailbox.
Yeah, and like all AWS services, the pricing is on the website. It's very transparent, and you pay for basically what you use, which I think is terrific. Um, I This is a question that I saw in the list that came in earlier, and it's a question, the difference between storing messages in S3 versus storing messages in archive, because like they look similar, but they're quite different. Could you share
They
this?
are, yeah, absolutely. So storing in S3 is absolutely the right answer for customers who want to do things that Mail Manager doesn't offer natively, or they have a particular security constraint where they need to be in direct control of the storage resource itself. So we do offer that, and you can certainly do that and then build your own search mechanisms, query mechanism, whatever it's going to be on top of your own S3 buckets. If you use the Mail Manager archiving function, it is a managed service and it's operated by SES. So while the storage bucket is exclusively provisioned for your use, it is ultimately managed and maintained by SES, and it falls under the standard SLA for availability and the fee structure that's part of Mail Manager pricing. You get the automatic application benefits as well. So we do all the indexing, we set up the search, the export features, and then the ability, to operate in parallel with other resources through Rules Engine. All of that becomes, fully maintained for you as a managed service. So a lot less work to build it and set it up and maintain it. But obviously, ultimately, your experience is defined by the features that we offer in the product natively. But we try very hard not to restrict you, so you can do both. We have customers who are doing that as well, where they're choosing to archive for certain messages and to use S3 for others because they have, their own very proprietary needs that they want to service against their own storage.
Great. Yeah. Preeti, any other questions that are in there?
Let me see. Yes. There's one about whether email journaling applies to recipients in the BCC field.
Sounds like an Andy question. Or
Yep.
maybe it's a Toby question.
No, it's an Andy question. Go for it.
Yeah, the answer is yes. It does. Email journaling does apply to the BCC field, and if it and again, journaling captures both in and out email, and only if the email is marked as containing virus, then it will be filtered out. But for all BCCs in and out, it will be journaled.
Got it. That makes sense. And then there's another one about what happens if I stop journaling at some point in the future.
Toby, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, in the archiving sense, if you turn off journaling, we won't insert any new messages into your existing archive. Your existing archive will remain unless you explicitly remove it up until its original retention period expires, at which point we start aging out content that's older than that retention window. But in terms of pricing implications, you would continue to pay the monthly storage for the data that remained under management in the archive, but you wouldn't incur any new insertion and indexing fees.
And that's a good point. I don't know that we hit that point. The retention period is highly customizable, correct?
It is, yeah. And each archive you create can have its own separate retention period. So, for testing purposes, you might have one where you're only retaining it for a month, and in others you might want it indefinite or 10 years or some other longer period. So all of that is configurable at the time you create the archive in the first place. And we do allow, you can extend the life of an existing archive, but if you're going to constrain it, if you originally set it for, say, 8 years and you want to reduce it to 5, then the operation first has to go through and age out all the material that's older than the new retention period. So 5 years plus a day. But you have the ability to manage those archives in the console.
And the archiving feature of Mail Manager does support customer KMS keys, right?
It does. Yeah, absolutely. And we recommend that. So you can choose to use your own KMS key alongside the SES service managed key. And then that allows you to bind different security policies based on who has access to the secrets manager and the ability to deploy and decrypt against your KMS key. So there's a fair degree of flexibility. And again, it's consistent with how other roles and permissions are managed across IAM roles and resource permissions throughout AWS.
And Amazon's not reading your email, right?
That's correct. So the conditions for SES to essentially break the glass as needed are highly restricted. There are conditions under law enforcement investigations and things like that, which are described in the AWS service agreements. But as a rule, no, the data is encrypted on a per customer basis, and there's no way for us to browse through and just see what's in there.
Great. Preeti, we're almost, my plane's about to take off. No, just kidding. I have a little bit of time left over. Do we have any other questions or we want to wrap it up?
Let's see. I think most of the other questions we've addressed during the webinar. So.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to remind people that we're constantly blogging on the AWS messaging blog. We're constantly blogging about Mail Manager and new use cases, new features, new functions, but also all the other SES capabilities and then Workmail. Basically, if you use it to message, you'll find it in the messaging blogs. And for those blogs, a lot of times they're connected to GitHub repos with really interesting solutions that you can apply and kick the tires a little bit and build your own capabilities. And we love to hear about that. In the blogs, there's always a way to get in touch with the authors and ask questions.